The Attempted Murder of Teddy Roosevelt, a novel, by Burt Solomon. Narrated by Paul Heitch. Prologue. Wednesday, September 3, 1902. Big Bill Craig, the president's bodyguard, saw it first, or heard it. The clanging was insistent, like a boxing gong. The Secret Service man spun in his seat and gazed up Howard's Hill in horror. A trolley car was hurtling down toward them. On the 13th and final morning of Theodore Roosevelt's campaign tour of New England, his horse-drawn carriage was leaving Pittsfield at the western edge of Massachusetts. The city's church bells had tolled, the factory whistles had rung, the schools and mills had shut down. The president had addressed 2,000 admirers from a bunting-bedecked bandstand in Park Square, and his open-air landau was a mile and a half along South Street, rolling toward Lenox. It was 10:15. "Oh, my God!" Craig cried. He reached an arm over President Roosevelt's head. "Look out! Hold fast!" The sepulchral Governor Crane turned and leapt to his feet and waved his arms. The electric streetcar kept rushing downhill along the center of South Street. At the bottom of the hill, the road narrowed and the tracks slanted to the right. This was where carriages ordinarily crossed. Today, the vantage point was crowded with Kodak enthusiasts. The landau's 2 lead horses cleared the tracks. The 2 wheel horses did not. The trolley's metal fenders slammed into the nearer wheel horse and the left front wheel of the rig. The carriage toppled over, splintering its sides. Its occupants went flying. Wheels spun unfettered. Horses kicked at nothing. Their shrieks filled the air. Suddenly, silence. Governor Crane landed on his shoulder in the roadside 20 feet away, uninjured but white with shock. George Bruce Cortelyou, the president's secretary, suffered cuts to his nose and the back of his head. The carriage driver lay still under the fallen horse. President Roosevelt was thrown 30 or 40 feet into a bank of soft earth, crumpling his silk hat, shattering his spectacles, ripping his frock coat at the elbows, crushing the red rose in his lapel, and covering his patent leather shoes with dust. His right cheek was swollen and blood flowed from a cut on his lip. His bronzed face was splattered with mud. His personal physician, Dr. Lung, in the nearest carriage, rushed to his side and probed the barrel chest for broken ribs. "I'm all right!" The growl came out as a squeak. The president pushed his doctor away. "Some of the others are badly hurt. Look after them!" Roosevelt jumped up in a rage. The trolley had rolled 20 feet down the track, and by the time he reached it, his temper had calmed, and his fists had loosened, if slightly. "Where is the motorman of this car?" he demanded. "Here, sir." The respondent was a meek-looking man of indeterminate age, short and balding, with rounded features, but a defiant crouch. "Did you lose control of the car?" Roosevelt's high-pitched voice had grown husky. The motorman looked too frightened to answer. "If you did, that was one thing," the president bore on. "If you didn't, it was a goddamned outrage." The passengers gasped. "You don't suppose I tried to do it, do you?" the motorman managed at last. Roosevelt bit his puffy lip. "Well, I had the right of way anyway," Euclid Madden, for that was his name, continued. "You had a right to look out for yourselves." Roosevelt looked like he wanted to punch the man. With a visible effort, he turned away. That was when he saw what remained of William Craig. The Secret Service man lay under the sharp metal wheels of the trolley. He had been dragged along the track, his mighty torso crushed, his skull split open. The president sank to his knees. "Oh, poor Craig! Poor Craig! Poor Craig!" he moaned. "Here, some of you, get a blanket and throw it over that body." He bounced to his feet and stalked off. No one dared follow. Chapter 1. Wednesday, September 3, 1902. "You should have come, Henry," I said. "You'd have hated it." Henry Adams had the good grace to laugh. It was a merry sound, so different from the Brahmin breathiness of his chatter. "Labor Day is a silly idea to start with," he said. "Mr. Cleveland's sop to the unions. So when is Capitalist Day, pray tell?" "Every day is Capitalist Day," I replied. "You ought to know, hey?" Henry jabbed. Then, "The lawyers lost, you say?" 8-2 on Georgetown College's campus. The doctors hit the ball too damn hard. So did the lawyers, but right at someone. "I find a certain pleasure in that, I must say, old boy." Henry was well aware that I am a lawyer, though I have had the luck never to have practiced a day. "You don't find pleasure in anything, Henry," I said. "I've never known anyone who enjoyed his unhappiness more. Part of your charm." "Only a part." Our daily stroll usually began in Lafayette Square, in our topcoats and silk hats, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The walks had been Clara's idea. What wasn't? And not only to keep me, at the venerable age of 63, in, you should pardon the expression, boxing trim. Mainly it was to lure me away from my office in that sand castle next to the White House, the State, War, and Navy building, whose architect had killed himself a year after the final gewgaw was squeezed on. Lately, the world had cooperated. It's a pain in the arse to be a world power. How I've missed spending all summer in New Hampshire. But I shouldn't complain. This summer was the quietest since the mid-90s, or certainly in the 4 years since McKinley had done me the dubious honor of making me his Secretary of State. Not that I played hard to get, I just made it look that way. Theodore, probably against his better judgment, had kept me on. Today, Henry and I dispensed with our topcoats, for the afternoon was hot and humid, womb-like in my way of thinking. Henry was wearing his starched frock coat, wing collar, and funereal cravat. He looked even paler than usual, his cheeks thinner. More hair seemed to have migrated from his scalp to his pointed, devilish beard. He looked like the oversized brain that he was. Yet I had never known a man so honest in his intellect and in his morals. We glided to a stop without conferring along the western edge of the square in front of 22 Jackson Place Northwest. The sturdy brick townhouse with the pretentious Greek temple pediments over the windows was serving as the temporary White House. The real one was being renovated, cellar to attic, adding a western wing for the president's executive offices. "You know, Theodore is a stupid, blundering, bolting bull-calf," Henry was saying. The diamond stick-pin in his cravat caught the afternoon light. "Tell me, Henry, what do you really think?" "And he might have arranged this accident by himself. He is capable of it, you know." "That's cynical, Henry, even for you." "But plausible. For a president, you know, character is destiny." "Why on earth would you ever think that?" I teased. Henry's grandfather and great-grandfather had been presidents, of which he never tired of reminding me. But as usual, Henry had a point. Too often I made the mistake of judging presidents as people. Idiotic, I know, for a Secretary of State, but I had befriended enough of them since Lincoln not to be cowed. And in this regard I had to admit that Theodore came up a little short. Not that I was pure. Yet he had the noblest traits: intelligence, fidelity, passion, sincerity, honesty, a grasp of history, a good heart, not to mention gobs of courage, physical and moral. His undeniable virtues were entangled, however, with a fixation on himself and a belief in his own rightness that scared me. He was warm to his friends. His thank-you notes were sonatas in paper and ink, but quick to belittle his political opponents as antis or eunuchs. You didn't want him at your dinner table if anyone else had a desire to talk. Here was a man of substance and probity who was still, in many ways, a child. You had to remember, as his best man said, that Theodore was about 6 years old. I liked him. I did. I made allowances for youth. Maybe he was stuffed fuller with talents than any mortal could handle with grace. Cordelew's wire had come before noon, telling of the collision and the 2 arrests. The president was considerably bruised, but not injured seriously. And Governor Crane had escaped without a scratch.